Hey, good morning. How y'all doing? It is Well Red Beard. It is a damn fine day to talk about a book, and we are here for the Gonzalez Project, episode 2, and we're going to talk about Shapeshifter, his very first standalone novel, according to, I don't think it's Books in Order that I'm using. I don't know if they've got him on booksinорder.com, but there was one website that I looked at to get that information. So it's my second read by J.F. Gonzalez, having done Survivor last year, I think. Go back, check the review out. This is a very popular, talked about extreme horror book. So I did this one. I wanted to go back to the beginning, and now we're doing Shapeshifter. It's a werewolf story. And I'm going to say that I didn't love it. I'm going to give the book 2 stars. It was just okay for me. I mean, it was, I had a lot of the early 2000s leisure horror cheese that I probably loved 20 years ago, and not so much now. But I am, going back to these books because I want to, because there's nostalgia there for me. I've said multiple times, but I was in the club, pre Goodreads, pre, most social media, and so I've got this desire to go back and read the leisure, books of Gonzalez and Keene and Richard Lehman. I liked a lot of those Richard Lehman books back then. But I've only read probably one Richard Lehman. I think it was The Lake. I've only read one Richard Lehman in the last 5 years. And didn't like it at all. And I'm going back to these and finding what I'm referring to now as the leisure cheese, and wondering if I'm going to feel that way about all of them. So trying to handle them a bit differently, not be too overly judgy, just kind of read them for fun and all that. This one, again, it's a werewolf story. There is a man named Mark Wiseman who is a werewolf, and we find this out early on. He wasn't bitten. He didn't consume wolf's bane. He doesn't know how he became a werewolf. He just knows that he was like bullied in high school, and one day, the bully cornered him in an alley, and the switch just flipped. It just, wolfish rage, roared out of him, and it wasn't a good day for the bully. So he works in like a computer tape room, like an old like mainframe room at this financial or insurance company, and he's struggling with the control of this thing, right? And one night he turns and it's caught on camera. No one really notices it, but it just so happens at the time of it happening, the CEO was leaving for the day and standing outside the security desk, and he just happens to notice this thing. And so, he kind of takes Mark, blackmails him almost to, so they're in this midst of this corporate merger, and he's going to be out on his ass because they're merging with this larger company, and he doesn't want it to happen. And so, like, he sends Mark on this on these kill sprees, or these hit jobs, with the board members that are against his point of view, like for the merger. So we go through 3.5 of those, 3.5 wolfish attack kill scenes, and so that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, there's just not a lot of, I don't know if believability is the right word, but I mean, I get it. I get, that maybe hiring a werewolf to do this, it would be a bit more wild for like detectives or anybody trying to figure out the crime than just having like a standard hitman take care of it. But it just felt like off, like the believability of it. I mean, it's a werewolf book, it's a horror book. I get it. Sometimes it's tough to talk about believability in those types of things, but it just like the entire plot of the thing just felt off. So, Mark's doing the thing. In the fourth one, he kind of holds back a bit, like he's starting to question what he's doing. He doesn't really want to kill any more of these guys. He thought it would be over by now and he could move on with his life. And this CEO, Bernard is his name, would, kind of let him go and stop holding this thing that he knows about him over his head. And so, like, because of that, like, he doesn't finish the job on the fourth one. And when that happens, Bernard, like, is coming after him. And so he's, like, on the run. In the meantime, there's a female character, Carol. She is Bernard's secretary. And in the very first chapter of the book, we have a very detailed sex scene between her and Bernard. The CEO, the secretary, but somewhere along the line, she hooks up with Mark, meets him at a bar, they hit it off, and she's like not hanging with Bernard anymore. She's Mark's girl, right? And so when he goes on the run, she goes on a run with him. I'm gonna kind of leave it there, I think, as far as plot. For me, I said this about Survivor. I thought Survivor had some repetitive parts, like some things that just felt repetitive. This book had that as well, and maybe more so. Like it wasn't like awful, but there was probably like, it was more than 5 under 10 times that I noticed it. Just little things that felt repetitive. And I tried to mark an example. I'm going to see if I can find that for you right now. So, all right. Mark's anger exploded. He pinned the hand that held the handgun to the floor and grunted as he tried to hold Bernard down. Bernard's left hand shot up and struck Mark in the face. Mark barely felt it. Already he could feel instinct taking over, and he silently tried to empty himself out to allow the change to occur. The last 8 months of murderous, hateful emotions that he had harbored toward Bernard Roberts were all coming to the surface, and they manifested themselves in a fighting rage. Bernard hit Mark twice, once in the face. The second blow glanced off his chest. Mark barely felt him. So for me, like, he already hit him in the face, and we barely felt it. And then, like, a sentence later, Bernard hit Mark twice, once in the face, and Mark barely felt him. So it's just little things like that. Like, maybe it was on purpose. Maybe that's, maybe these were 2 additional punches, and we wanted to enforce the fact that Mark barely felt them. But there were things like that throughout that gave me pause. Another thing about this, I didn't really care for the ending, and it's hard for me to tell you this without giving you the ending for each individual character. But we're basically focused on 3 characters here: Mark, Bernard, and Carol. And it comes down to a head in a hotel room. Mark and Carol are on the run. So Mark and Carol are on the run, and they end up somewhere in Missouri, and Bernard's trying to track them, but he has no idea where they're at. They've already had a run-in at a place where you could kind of believe the fact that Bernard found him, but then they got away from that situation, and now they're just on the run. And the only way Bernard can find him now is he's kind of monitoring the news for a vicious animal-like killing, because once a month, when the moon is full, there's a good chance that Mark's going to do his thing. And that happens in Missouri, somewhere in Missouri. But they immediately run, and we know that Bernard is going to Missouri to confront Mark and Carol again for the second time. But they get the F out of there. I don't know why I said that. They get out of there, And, this thing happens in Illinois. Like, I mean, I know Illinois is close to Missouri, but, like, it felt like they were, like, a couple 100 miles away, maybe. And Bernard just happened to find them when he was going to Missouri. I get that. I mean, while, finding out exactly where they were based off of, animal related deaths or whatever is somewhat believable. They got out and he still found them, like, within, like, a, I don't know, 200-mile radius or whatever. That, again, it felt off. There were a couple times like that where the ways that we justified things felt weak. They felt off. So they have a run-in, another run-in. And at the end of it, we're left with what has happened to all three characters. And I don't really want to ruin that part for you in case you ever do read it. But the part about Carol at the end, I just didn't love it. Like, I didn't mind the what was going to be the end of the story for her, but there's like a shit ton of buildup. Like, it suggests what's going to happen, and then we spend like 10, 12 pages, like, kind of like doing like a retelling of what's happened since the final showdown, like in 15 months or whatever, the retelling of it through Carol's eyes, all while listening to the band Sweet, Ballroom Blitz, and all this shit, and almost to the level of like an American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis love of the band Sweet, much like in that book he does, Whitney Houston and Huey Lewis and the News. And I mean, it wasn't to that level, don't get me wrong, but it definitely made me think of it. And then we go to like Bernard. Like, let's just say Bernard, what happens to him after there are things there that I didn't need. Okay, I'm gonna spoil it for you at this point. So if you've come this far and you don't want to be spoiled, get out of here. Bernard gets caught. Bernard goes to jail for conspiracy to commit these murders, for embezzling and shit like that, and he goes to jail. He gets like a life sentence for this shit. And I don't need to know that he was gang raped in prison. I don't need the explicit details of that shit. I don't need to know how big the guy that raped him was. I mean, in his nether regions. I don't need to know that shit. I mean, the story's over. Tell me that Bernard went to prison, and that's good. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm supposed to hate this guy enough that by this point I want to know these things, but I didn't want to know these things. And like there's even like a book that had like 0 racial slurs in it, uses them in the very last chapter to tell us how Bernard is being raped in prison. I just didn't need any of that. So, I don't know. That's just me, though. That's just me. This is, a run-of-the-mill 2000s. I don't know when it came out. Let me see real quick. This came out in 2008. Okay. So, I would have thought earlier than that. Actually, he wrote it it says copyright 2000, 2003, but this came out as a leisure book in 2008. So, I didn't love it. I'm giving it 2 stars. I mean, I never thought about putting it down. Maybe I did think about putting it down a couple times, but I'm pretty horrible at putting books down once I get deep into them. I'm not much of a DNFer. And I want to be able to, in a couple years, I want to be able to come back and say, okay, these are my J.F. Gonzalez books. These are, my top 5. I want to be able to come back and say, okay, these are my top leisure books, Okay, these are the cheesiest of the cheese, I want to be able to do that type of stuff. So I want to read them all. I know it's impossible, but I want to read them all. Anyway, Shapeshifter, J.F. Gonzalez. I'm giving it 2 stars. If you want a werewolf book, if you want a recommendation, read Carnivorous Lunar Activities by Max Booth. I think that's right. I read that a couple years ago and liked it. If you want a Gonzalez book, I would say read Survivor. Even though I only 3-starred Survivor, it's, very talked about, very important as far as extreme horror goes. I mean, if you want to, If you're a collector like me and you want to have an opinion of these things, read Survivor. If you want a leisure horror book, now I'm going to say this loosely because I read it 20 years ago, but In the Dark was my favorite Richard Lehman back then. It may not hold up when I get around to reading it again, but those are my recommendations. Anyway, Shapeshifter, J.F. Gonzalez, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying all your books as much as I am. If not, you're reading the wrong damn books.